Okay, so this video will be the next part of looking at Creeley. So I'm going to go ahead and share his work with us. At the end of the last video, I gave a reading of it, and I try to talk us through and try to remind us of things about line and image and abstraction. So please have watched that first. If you haven't, you can still get a lot out of this one, I hope. But also, it might be nice to have some things that I've mentioned there really work. So I'm going to jump right in here with Creeley. Remember, line, image, sentence, abstraction. This is what we're trying to think about. And then, of course, trying to understand, like, what is the poem saying? Interestingly, Creeley is a complicated poet. I like complicated poetry. What do I mean by that? I mean that I don't think that Creeley necessarily tells us exactly what we're supposed to think. He's using syntax and language in ways that kind of asks us a lot to think about, and his sentences don't always sound really normal. I mean, normal. They sound as if they've been created a little bit to make us think about them sort of sideways. So I'm going to jump right in here. So keep in mind the title of this poem here, right? For Love. He's starting us off with a very large abstraction. And as we've been talking about specifically with this word, my dog just came in, specifically with this word, is that we don't really know what kind of love he's talking about, right? I know that, as I mentioned last time, that Bobby, right, is the dedication is to his wife. So we're going to assume a kind of romantic love. But of course, even that has a lot of different components to it. And that's just life stuff. That's not like any kind of English thing. Like, romantic love is complicated. It isn't just like, you know, that one picture of the wedding day. It has to do with like arguments about like sandwich meat. That's a rare, it's a random thing to bring up, but trust me, that's happened. But anyway, so for love. Okay, so I want to know that interestingly enough, this isn't about love. It's the preposition has a lot of weight here, right? It's for love. So it's a poem written for love, right? So think about John Coltrane has an album where he wrote it, you know, he says in the liner notes, he wrote it for God. So this is kind of like this idea, right? It's like to this large idea, to this concept of love, a poem, a love poem to love, right, if you will. So we jump right in and we're thinking about line, image, and all of these good things. So I'm going to read these lines in this first stanza, and then I'm going to read them into the first sentence, really kind of stopping at the end of each line, right? So we can kind of hear his line breaks and see why line matters. Yesterday I wanted to speak of it, that sense above the others to me, important because all that I know derives from what it teaches me. So these breaks to me feel pretty harsh, right? They don't fall in places where I would naturally pause in a sentence. If I was going to read this just like it was a conversation, I would say, yesterday I wanted to speak of it, that sense above the others to me, important because all that I know derives from what it teaches me. So, I mean, maybe there's a natural pause here at me, maybe there's one here, but basically he's breaking away from what we're comfortable with, which we think about earlier with uniformity and variety and sorry, variation. I feel like he's playing with that even with the way his lines work. But I also have some, not necessarily imagery, but I'm dealing with time. The first thing he tells me is yesterday, right? And then I wanted to speak of it. So here speak is an image of sound, right? An image of being able to hear this. And then the it, and the it refers, of course, back to love. Right? So he says, yesterday I wanted to speak of it, of love. That sense, which is interesting because we're talking about imagery, he calls it love a sense, all right? And we'll come back to this. That sense above the others to me important because all that I know derives from what it, love, right? Love, teaches me. So this is fascinating. So he's telling me yesterday, okay, I wanted to speak of love. And then he describes it, he defines it, and he defines it as a sense above the others to me. And then he says it's in a hierarchy of the senses, right? So here's taste, touch, smell, hear, and feel. That's the same as taste. I always forget the other one. Taste, touch, smell, eat. I don't care. Look, that's where they are. But he says love is a sense that's actually above them. And if you understand anything about sense, right, why we have senses, they're the way we interact with the world. So he's basically saying that love is a way that we interact with the world. So how do we know when things are hot? Because we touch them. And what does that tell us? It teaches us not to touch hot things, right? So love is the same way. Love is a sensory experience. It tells us what to go toward and what to avoid, which is kind of an interesting argument in and of itself. I mean, do you believe that? Do you buy that? Do you think that's real? And it's an interesting question he's trying to just put on top of this. But basically he's saying, look, I wanted to talk about love yesterday. Okay. And because in some way, because it's the highest sense that I know, it's the way that I engage with the whole universe. And everything that he knows, he tells me, everything that he knows, it derives or it comes from what it teaches him. Right. So in other words, love has taught him everything. Everything that he knows comes from love. And so he wants to speak about it. All right. So that's a nice little opening sentence here. But also these enjambments on the line, and an enjambment is when a line breaks in a way that doesn't feel natural. And it kind of disrupts the reading a little bit. It makes it, I don't want to say uncomfortable, but it makes it a little bit less rhythmic, a little bit less, the word I always see in papers is flow, right? It flows better, and in some ways that's kind of true. But this is against the natural sentence structure. And the sentence structure, with the way we talk, is meant to keep us engaged, meant to carry through rhetorically so that you'll keep paying attention to me. And he's disrupting that. So there's something in here about disruption and how love operates. And I want to think about that as we go forward. So everything that I know, right, that's what it teaches me. So new sentence, right? New sentence, new line. Today, what is it that is finally so helpless, different, despairs of its own statement, wants to turn away, endlessly to turn away? Okay. So this is a complicated sentence. And part of the reason that it's complicated is that this whole sentence, there's not really an image in it. I think you could say turn away is an image, because we can kind of see like a person making a turn in that sense, or, whatever, something else turning. So there's a real physicality to that. But the rest of this is completely abstract. Today, and that's kind of abstract, but still a little bit present. He says, today, what is it that is finally so helpless? What's so different? What despairs of its own statement? So what is despairing of its own reality, of its own existence? What about today, he's asking? Is it that I just feel despair about the fact that it's today, which if you've ever been alive before, you may just have a day where you're like, I just feel sad that today is today. No reason, no good reason, because he doesn't know. He says that, what is it, right? He's like, I don't know why, but today I feel despair. It's a real opening. So yesterday I wanted to talk about it, but I didn't. But today things are different. Things are helpless. Things are full of despair. And they want to turn away. Wants to always or endlessly to turn away. Right? He doesn't actually answer the question that he starts with, if you notice, right? He starts with today, what is it that is finally so helpless? He doesn't give us an answer, right? He just basically tells us that today he feels these ways: helpless, different, despairing, wants to turn away, wants to endlessly turn away. So there's something about feeling negative, right, that makes him want to talk about love or write, for love. Whereas yesterday he seemed like he was having a pretty good day. Like he recognized that it's a good thing, but in his negativity, he seeks positivity. Like, why do you think that is? You don't have to answer that, but I think it's an interesting question that he's trying to get us to ask. And so he moves finally into an image in the third stanza. He says, if the moon did not, and then he gives us an ellipses, right? So punctuation. An ellipses is a concentrated pause, basically, right? If you've done any kind of theater, theater uses these a lot, right? Instead, if you look at playbills, not playbills, but the scripts themselves, it tells the actor or the actress to slow down, right? Take a pause, take a beat, for instance. And he's doing this here. So he tells me if the moon did not. So he gives us an image finally. The moon, right? Up there, the moon. So he says, if the moon did not, and we see it. And if you've ever read any kind of poetry before, or ever Romeo and Juliet, with like the whole idea of, what light from yonder window breaks, this idea that like romantics have always looked at the moon as some sort of romantic image, some kind of place where we can, our love shoots toward that. And even in religion, like in Zen Buddhism or Buddhism, we can say the path to the moon starts with a step. So it's like an image of like distance, but of beauty, of serenity. It controls the tides. There's a lot of power in the moon, but it's very distant from us, very cold at the same time. So there's a lot of images with this, or sorry, a lot of meaning behind this image. But he says, if the moon did not, ... know if you did not, I wouldn't either. So basically he's saying, I don't want to talk about the moon as like a metaphor, right? A metaphor for our love and for you. I don't want to do that. And that's an interesting move, I think, to say, if I'm going to talk about love, I'm going to talk about love. I'm not going to talk about the moon. But we do that, I feel like. We don't talk about the thing. We talk about what the thing reminds us of, or what the thing is, especially when it's a complicated idea like love. So if the moon did not, no, if you did not, then I wouldn't either. And we have to ask the question, I think, of did not what, right? Did not what? Well, love, right? If you did not love me, then I wouldn't either. I wouldn't love you back, right? But what would I not do? What prevention? What thing so quickly stopped? And this is a lovely idea right here. Notice the lines are getting a little bit more on point, but this is fun. Notice here, in this particular stanza, 3 of the 4 lines end on the word not. This is an example of close reading, something that I'm noticing that's nuanced in the poem, not super nuanced, but it's interesting. 3 of the words end on the word not. Right. And keep in mind, the content of the stanza is saying, I don't want to talk about what I don't want to talk about. I want to talk about what I want to talk about. So all these negations are in here. And the only word that doesn't is the word but, which is a contradictory beginning. Right. So this is a very contradictory statement. Right. This whole stanza is built on that, using the line in this sentence to make that make sense. And using an image, right, as well. So this is a perfect stanza for what we're trying to cover this week. Or today, I should say, and also this week. So if the moon did not, no, if you did not, and right, look at this negation here, right? So not even, and also there's a wouldn't, right? So that also has another not tied into it, the contraction. And then, I mean, this is just a loaded negative stanza. If the moon did not, no, if you did not, I wouldn't either, but what would I not do? What prevention, what thing so quickly stopped? And basically, and then we have a not tucked down here too, and I'll stop. But basically, it's this idea of asking a pretty interesting question, which is, if you tell me you don't love me, I wouldn't love you either. Okay, fair enough. Like in a perfect world, that's exactly what we would do. But he's saying, what wouldn't I do though? Like, how do I turn off love? Is it like what thing? What prevention? What thing so quickly stopped? How would I do that? And I think that's a heartbreaking moment, because isn't that, I think that's exactly true. We have pills for everything. We have medication. We've done a lot of great work with the mind, but we have no cure for unrequited love. We have no ability to handle that as a species. And that's what he's getting at here, right? In this poem for love, right? This love poem to love, he's talking about that. But then he says, that is love yesterday or tomorrow, not now. And keep in mind here that we see time again and again, right? So the image of time, right? The image of time keeps showing up. Time is important. The question we have to ask ourselves for like a larger, more interesting critical observation is, what does time have to do with love? What does love have to do with time? How do they interrelate with one another, right? Do they have a connection? Do they have a disconnection? Because he's saying that if I'm thinking here about you not loving me anymore, right? If I'm thinking about this and what I would do to be able to quit that, he says that whole idea of questioning love and how it operates, that is what love would have been yesterday, or what love would be like tomorrow, but it's not right now. And the interesting thing is that like only right now is what we can be accountable for, right? This breath, this moment is reality. Here's where we are. Yesterday is just me kind of like replaying events and picking and choosing the parts of it that I'm interested in, right? So it's not real. It's just like a version of reality. And in the future and in tomorrow, I mean, I can't predict any of it, but I always do. I'm always like trying to invent reality for tomorrow, but there's no guarantee of that. But now I can. And he's saying, I want to pay attention to now. Now is where I want to be. And I'm going to let that be the end of the second part here. And then I'll try to get through it in the next one. And if I don't, then those questions that I have will be focused on those as we go forward. Okay, thank you.